This series of the 50 Faces podcast is proudly brought to you by B Finance, a trusted partner to the world's leading institutional investors. With a proven track record in strategy, implementation, and oversight, B Finance delivers bespoke investment consultancy that empowers asset owners to achieve their unique objectives. Whether it's refining portfolio strategy, selecting fund managers, monitoring performance, or getting better value for money, B Finance combines global expertise with tailored solutions to unlock value for their clients. To learn more about how they've supported over 500 clients in 45 countries, managing assets totaling over $9 trillion, visit bfinance.com.
I think there's this power, and my dad would talk about it as being a minority at work, that you feel like the spotlight is on you and you just can't afford to make mistakes. And I think carrying that is heavy. And I've learned over time that it's okay to make a mistake. Just learn from it and move on and get better. So that's been powerful. And I think men are particularly good at that, just moving on, like, oh, not a big deal. And so I've really tried to grasp that and move on.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Chelsea Smith, who's Senior National Director, Family Office Services at Bernstein Private Wealth Management, based in Chicago. She started her career as an equity trader, and in recent years has been heavily involved in diversity initiatives designed to attract a more diverse pipeline into the finance industry. Welcome, Chelsea. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here.
Can we start with where you grew up and your early education and how that ultimately led you to finance?
Yes, it's been quite a journey. I was born overseas in Taipei, Taiwan. My dad was in the Air Force and happened to be one of the first triplets to be born in the Air Force base there. And that really started our journey. After leaving China, my dad enrolled in Harvard Business School. And so Boston was our first stop. And then we were really along for his ride for his corporate journey. We started in Cincinnati, moved to Louisville, Glen Rock / Ridgewood, New Jersey, Portage, Michigan, Gull Lake, Michigan, Louisville, Kentucky, Barrsville, Oklahoma, and then stopped in Detroit. So I was grateful to be a triplet because it really helped in the many lunchrooms that we were in. But their education model was the best public school district, which often meant predominantly white suburbs. So with the exception of Detroit, that was our early schooling. And then after high school, we all split up and I matriculated at Notre Dame and my sisters were at Stanford and Cornell.
Such an impressive trajectory for all three of you. And I, of course, now remember the few very poignant LinkedIn posts that you've had featuring your sisters and using really them as a great example of achieving the American dream, but also the camaraderie that came from being one of triplets. A fascinating story. And so how old were you when you settled in Detroit finally then?
A junior in high school.
Okay, so quite a bit of movement before then. And then,
Yes.
so I think you mentioned your sisters may have gone into different professions, but what made you choose finance?
Yeah, so when I was in business school, I was an English major undergrad, and my sisters studied pre-med. And so initially I thought I was pre-med. I hated breaking up that story of triplet doctors, but I ultimately followed the passion of one of the best teachers I ever had, Mrs. Dunn. And in her English high school AP class, I learned about life that transcended English and papers around James Joyce. That was calling me to go back to that because I love the storytelling, which it actually makes sense on why I even ended up in sales. And so after sales, I went to business school thinking I would go the brand management path. And a Black second-year student, Sean Cooper, pulled me aside. She had just gotten an offer with a large investment bank on the sales and trading desk. And she said, you really should think about this business. It's built for us. And that was what brought me into the industry. I never would have thought about it. I would have gone on my way, which would have been fine. And I became enthralled with it, actually. I loved the markets. I started becoming a student at them. And ultimately, after business school, ended up at a great firm starting out.
It's fascinating. And I do think it's absolutely right to trace that storytelling instinct to telling the financial story, or whether it's a family office story or a story as to why a financial instrument makes sense. But I don't think we often join the dots on that. So we tend to focus more on the STEM academic path as opposed to more of a liberal arts. But I think it really makes perfect sense as you describe it. And now switching gears to your current role, or even maybe steps to that current role, from your vantage point at this point in family office services, what's at the forefront of your mind and what kind of services are you focused on?
What's on my mind is I'll start with how we define what a family office is. And we think of it as a family entity that's driven by a common purpose across generations. And I say that because I think there's a lot of emphasis on structure, more instead of the focus on the family and what are the family needs? What is the family value? What is the storytelling around those values, and how are you going to make sure future generations hear that story? So starting at that place is super important. And I just wrote a paper about it in which I said your value allocation is just as important as your asset allocation. And once you figure out what you truly value and care about as a family and what you want to transcend from generations to come, then all the other pieces make sense and fall into place. So not only will you have an amazing asset allocation that really fits and suits your needs, but you'll also know how are you going to communicate as a family? How are you going to make decisions in hard times? So that is what I'm focused on. And we're realizing that while managing wealth is so important, but as you move up the complexity curve, as your wealth grows, living with wealth is just as important. And so we're finding and developing services that help families live with their wealth. And so that can be making sure their wealth is secure around cybersecurity. And so having strategic partnerships that can help families with that. Art is becoming, some are viewing that as an asset class. While we won't ever have that expertise, we can certainly vet and find the best partner to help families figure out how to approach art. Mental health is becoming a real concern. And if you think about passing wealth, a significant amount of wealth to the rising gen, and they're not mentally stable, how are they going to be stewards of the wealth that families have spent so much time creating? And so making sure that could be a part of the service platform. So we're continually thinking about how do we grow and help families figure out these complex issues. And so that's what's exciting. But I will also want to mention that we can work with families who may have figured this out, and then we can be just an investment partner. I feel like we've empowered our families to decide how they want to work with us, and we can work with families along the spectrum.
So interesting. And when you mentioned the values, so that's clearly the communication strategy and ensuring that everyone is resilient. I presume there's sometimes values diverge and from generation to generation, or even within a generation, maybe in terms of what to prioritize. How do you kind of manage the conflicts or try to get to compromise?
Yeah, well, so sometimes having a third party come in, like ourselves, can really help with that. And I think it's powerful when you acknowledge the differences, but then also find the through line across all family members. And there tends to be one. So really highlighting that, yes, rising gen, and we see this around impact and how the rising gen now more than ever really care about the world around them, justice. They want to figure out how do they invest like that. So how are you carving out space and time for that is really key. And we help families think through that as an example.
So all of these trends that you're mentioning, the more holistic type of service that now seems to be more and more in demand, just taking a step back from the industry as a whole, we see RIA firms rolling up. We see a massive interest from private equity in buying up wealth advisors. How do you see this industry as evolving? Do you see that desire for more holistic services is growing?
I think you're going to see acknowledgement that for families who are growing with complexities, that there'll be a growing need for non-financial services to match their complexities. So that's one. That's going to continue. And you could see more integration within firms, within investment firms. Two, I think you'll see this notion of let's not care about the structure or having an office per se, but let's make sure we have a team of trusted advisors who can collaborate together on our behalf, us included.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that'll be another trend. And three, I think there's going to be a greater emphasis on families spending time to really understand why are they even staying together as a family, what is most important to them, and making sure that everything they do is aligned back to a mission statement for their family. I see this more and more, and I'm excited actually for it.
Absolutely. And I think with today's frenetic pace of life, it's often rare that a family or any individual spends time to sit and think about their values and passing them on and expressing them, crystallizing them. So having a family office service as an excuse to do that, or as an opportunity to do that, I think is really quite interesting. And very interesting as well in terms of how this frees up talent if it is just about bringing the talent together, regardless of the office. I think we're definitely moving away from in-person meetings every quarter.
Yeah.
People are living elsewhere, living remotely, working hybrid, even the clients themselves. So
Yes.
being able to work around that is really fascinating. I'd love to shift gears to move on to a topic that's been very close to your heart. And certainly you've spoken about it a lot in recent years. And I'd love to maybe, when you're discussing it, talk a little bit about their family context, because I know you've spoken about your sisters and their own journeys. But this podcast focuses a lot on diversity within the financial services industry. Can you tell us your thoughts on that, where we are today, and the contribution you're making to improving that pipeline?
Yeah, so I think you always want it to be better. That's just natural. And there are times when I feel so optimistic, and I do. I'm generally an optimistic person. And so I think my role is a great example of progression and progress, which is great. But there's always work to be done. And so if I look at Bernstein, my firm, one of the things that makes me feel good is that there's an increase of young talent. And why that's important is if I look at the success of our advisors, they've been here for a long time. And so early entry is critical for folks of color or even women. I really believe that, because that gives them a long runway to figure out how to learn the business, learn from leadership, and have the chance to have stewardship from leadership. I think are all critical parts of success. Teaming, working on teams is really important. So the early we can get great talent, I think the better. And so if I look at the growth of diversity in our firm, it's happening at the entry level, which is great. And I hope that continues. Then once they get here, then that's when the work really begins, and making sure leadership is really on board. That's not just, hey, welcome, and you turn the corner and focus on something else. It's being intentional about spending time, having time scheduled on a monthly, whatever time period that's appropriate, but checking in and making sure it's that they will not fail. And so if I think of some of the success of some of our early leaders of color, that's what's happening. Leadership has said, I'm not going to let you fail. I'm going to spend time with you. I'm going to go on calls with you. I'm going to make sure you're partnering with different people. And so that's what needs to happen. And so the role that I play is I make sure I make time to spend time with them. I'm going on calls with them. I'm being a sounding board. I'm letting them ask stupid questions. I'm answering questions around protocol. What should I be doing? I'm giving direct feedback in the most kind way I can. But sometimes I know in the course of my career, I didn't get the feedback that I needed to change. I'm asking permission to give really direct feedback because we don't have time right now. We need to make a correction and move on. So that's what I'm doing. I'm putting the time in. I'm always making sure I allow time to meet with every person of color. I feel it's my duty.
It's so powerful. Usually my follow-up question is, what have you found that works? But clearly what you're saying is what works, is that actual intentionality around making sure, and often you can't have a program for that. It has to come from the individual, and it has to be consistent, and it has to be sustained. Because if it's not sustained, again, as you said, it's not going to get there. And generally we move to reflections here. Did you have anyone that did that for you? Did you have any mentor throughout your career?
I did. I'll highlight two, well, three. One Black male and one white male. And I think what worked with both is that they wanted to help. It was not thrust upon them, like they really wanted to help. So I need to stress that too. The white male who helped me, he was a part of a program at one of my previous employers, and they wanted to really try to make sure that women stayed in asset management. And he wanted to be a part of that program. And so, although he was assigned to me, he wanted to do it. So I think that was key. We met, we had a cadence of every month, and he would share feedback that maybe he just heard, which was powerful because some was positive, some was, okay, why don't you work on this, which was great. He helped me negotiate and ask for more. That's something that I struggled with. And so it was just a powerful connection. And even though I've switched firms, he's still a sounding board for me. And that is super powerful. And so I tell people is to find a mentor that's not employer based, but you based. And he follows me, which has been really powerful. And then the Black male mentor that I have is he gets the being Black piece. And I think, but is able to ascend and do amazing things. So he could give me other information or tips or strategies, and also just understand when I'm not feeling a certain way or great about a certain thing that happened. It was just powerful to be able to just share that with him, and he understand exactly what I was talking about. So that's powerful. And I'll end with my third one is my mom. I talk about my dad a lot, and he's been great. But what I was able to learn from my mom from a young age is just persevering and just fighting through places that maybe you shouldn't be. And the great example I can give there is she was in manufacturing most of her career, got promoted to a supervisor at age 32 in a Philip Morris plant, and was promoted and managed 50 plus year old white men. And when she was promoted, they stopped working. And her manager was like, I don't know why. She went to her manager. She's like, I don't think this is going to work out. They're not producing. And he's like, you can do it. You just have to find what's important to them. And so she realized that coffee was really important to them. And so she asked her manager to invest in some great coffee because the coffee was bad. And she started talking to them one-on-one. And she realized that one, they appreciated that she made a change right away and made their lives better, and that she took the time to meet with them individually. She then went on to become one of the best producing supervisors at I'm getting emotional, at an early age. And she kept moving. And to have that, to witness that growing up was amazing. And to hear about it and to hear my dad tell that story. So I think about how in tough situations, how can I find the coffee? And everyone has a coffee. You just have to find it. And that's what I've applied.
How extraordinary. And thank you for sharing that story about your mom. And I think when I hear about her, I instantly jump to mother of triplets, which in its own right is an incredible feat. So to have combined that with the moving around that you mentioned and this whole professional side, which we're just learning about now, sounds truly extraordinary on so many levels. So thank you for sharing. When you look back at your own career so far, now in family office services, but having rotated through sales and other financial service roles, what would you say were some of the highs and lows of that?
If I think of my highs, I'll start with the positive first. My highs was being asked to help grow a business. And I remember the manager said that you can do it. Because I think I was doubting myself and I did it. And so I think having the belief or having someone just say you can do it was all I needed. And I helped grow that business by over 100%. And that was so thrilling. I started closing business on the same call. And I think about what did I bring? And I brought authenticity, transparency, and just expertise. I knew this was a share buyback space and I knew it inside and out. And I knew how to run a successful share buyback program. And so I just shared what I learned. And that actually gave me so much credibility because in some cases, I even recommended competitors that do certain elements well alongside my firm, of course. And so that was amazing high. And I also realized from that process that it took a good 3 years before things really started to pop like popcorn, as I used to say. And so also trusting the process and knowing that it's going to take time, but if you follow it, and I was very disciplined in following it, then it can lead to success. So that's been a high. I think my low has been dealing with racism at work and unconscious racism and people who don't even know that they're being racist. And I feel like it also led to why I didn't get the direct feedback that I needed. And then I was kept off of opportunities. And so dealing with that was really tough because then I started spinning and getting into my head and questioning myself. But I got out of that. But that was probably one of my lows.
That is so powerful. I think that is the double-edged sword of where we are today in society, is that we are protecting so much and trying to be so careful about not offending that we're actually not giving that feedback that you mentioned. And often that's what's needed to unlock the next step or the next level. And I think I would apply what you said on a more general level to women as a whole. I think what you said about asking for permission to give direct feedback is a very simple check in with somebody and kind of to level set when the feedback comes in the spirit in which it was intended and is received in the spirit in which it was intended. So I think that that is something we should all take to heart, because if we're so worried about inadvertently offending somebody, we are not going to put them on a level playing field. So I think that's really powerful what you just said. And in terms of the lessons learned from setbacks, I think I know the answer there, not to put words in your mouth, but clearly the focus and intentionality you're bringing to your work with the next generation today, I would hope and think is an attempt to address that.
Yeah, I think there's this power, and my dad would talk about it as being a minority at work, that you feel like the spotlight is on you and you just can't afford to make mistakes. And I think carrying that is heavy. And I've learned over time that it's okay to make a mistake. Just learn from it and move on and get better. So that's been powerful. And I think men are particularly good at that, just moving on, like, oh, not a big deal. And so I've really tried to grasp that and move on.
I love it. And bring me to the final question is around any words of wisdom. You've certainly had a catalogue of fascinating mentors in your own life. Is there anything you've learned from them or just developed on your own in terms of words you can leave us with?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight at my dad's funeral, I wrote words and the president of his company wrote words. And what struck me is that we could have written each other's words. Who my dad was with my sisters and I, he was with women at work. He championed them. And that was so powerful to hear and see. The same corny dad jokes that he told us, he told at work. And so what I took from that is, wow, what a gift to him if I could be authentically Chelsea at home and at work. And so as hard as it's been to kind of conform to, what it means to be in financial services, I should actually be doing the opposite. And so that is what I would tell anyone now, and advice I would give even my younger self is don't shy away from who you are and be authentic. And then two, the notion around being curious. Luckily, I think I was born curious, but the minute you stop asking questions or trying to dive deeper for an understanding is kind of lost. And so I would encourage all to be curious. There's just so many great tools around for you not to get curious and get help with getting curious. So those would be the two things. Be authentic and curious.
Well, Chelsea, this has been a wonderful discussion. They say that great things come in threes. And you certainly came in three. And I think your two sisters probably would be wonderful future podcast guests. So we'll watch this space.
Yeah.
Because I do have a medical series. But certainly the three things I'm taking away from here is the focus on authenticity. And you spoke about that not only in the family office services domain, but also at a very visceral individual level, is nurturing that authenticity, that character, and paying attention to it through your life and through a family's life in that case. The idea of curiosity always appeals to me. I'm curious about learning in the world. So thank you for sharing that. And finally, your mom's focus on finding the coffee. There's an Irish expression that says that everything is usually seems better after a cup of tea. And whether tea or coffee, I think that unlocking that essence of what really matters to people can be a way to move forward. And I think that that's given us a lot of excellent food or drink for thought. So thank you very much for coming and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear from more investment experts and their passions, please tune in on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.